Awesome. So again, happy Friday. I'm Elena Hayes. I am Senior Director of Life Design for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I have the awesome privilege to lead a fantastic team, many of who are on the call today, and you'll be hearing from them later. But I want to quickly get into our awesome keynote address today from Adrienne Alberts. I am going to read her bio for everyone so that you are in the know of what she has to share, because she has some awesome insight to share. All right. Adrienne Alberts, Chief Diversity Officer, American Red Cross, has been an active organizational leader focused on diversity, talent management, operations, and career development for more than 20 years. In her current role, she leads enterprise-wide diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts. Adrienne's experience with the Red Cross spans 7 years, where she worked in strategic roles in human resources and disaster cycle services. Previously, Adrienne worked for GDIT, leading talent management programs and launching the inaugural Inclusion, Diversity, and Giving Center of Excellence, in addition to leading college and diversity recruiting for Constellation Energy and Booz Allen Hamilton after starting her career in higher education. Adrienne has spoken to national audiences about her passions of diversity and talent, and co-authored a chapter on diversity, recruiting, and winning the war for college talent. Adrienne has various board experiences, having served on the board of the Selinger School of Business at Loyola University in Maryland, and as Vice President of the Caroline Center Board of Directors. The Caroline Center is a nonprofit organization focusing on career preparation for unemployed and underemployed women in Baltimore City. Adrienne has also served on industry-specific boards for the National and Eastern Associations of Colleges and Employers. Adrienne is a native of Virginia and received her Master of Education in Counseling Psychology with a concentration on college student personal administration, and her Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So I promise you, you're in for a treat. So excited to hear from Adrienne to share her insights. I will turn it over to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It is nice to see some smiling faces that are familiar. So it's nice to see you all, and I'm happy to be with you all this afternoon. And really excited to be able to pair some things that I'm really passionate about, both my love of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and my love of university and university recruiting. So happy to talk to you about both of those passions of mine today. And just had a few prepared thoughts for you. And then after that, definitely would be open to any Q&A or discussion that you all might have before you move to the next part of your agenda. But I just wanted to set the stage by sharing something that I think we all are really familiar with. And it's this thing that I think we probably all have grappled with in one way or another as we think about building out the right types of programs for interns to be coming into our organizations. We do this work to create a really meaningful experience, to pair them with the right mentors, to create the right opportunities for them to be able to bond and engage as socially. We try to pair them with senior leaders, and we really create this environment that is often so dynamic over the summer that we find ourselves trying to make sure that there's a way to create that continued experience for them after the summer is over, when they join us full time, that the things that we create can be so fun and dynamic and engaging over the summer that the real experience of what it's like to work day to day could be a slight letdown. And I don't know if you all have dealt with that, but I've definitely dealt with that and grappled with that time and time again for internship programs. And as we go further into our conversation, I just want you to keep that in mind, because a lot of my feedback really stems back to that theme of creating programs that really are an authentic exploration into who you are as an organization. Um, I think about what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. And right now, at a time in our country where there's a lot of visibility, right, and a lot of attention being paid to these efforts, that it makes me think of two things. One, how I've seen students show up differently, and how that might impact some of the thinking that you have about what you're going to be doing with your interns and for your interns over the summer. And two, just a reflection for us really on what diversity, equity, and inclusion really mean for our organizations. I think of all that's literally happening in our country right now today. We have had a year where the Asian American communities have had increased violence and increased emphasis on that community in a way that we haven't always spoken up in the way that we should, and we're seeing a lot more vocal engagement around. I would anticipate that your students are on campuses and in experiences where they're thinking about that. They are figuring out ways to be in solidarity with the Asian American community and really being thoughtful about what that means for them. As they come to us, they'll bring that same energy and that same enthusiasm and that same challenge to be thoughtful about what that means in our organizations. And so I've seen students really be very vocal in their questions, in their interest in engagement, and in their willingness to be involved in all of the things that feel probably more unique and discrete to the experiences that they've always had than maybe they feel to us as we are trying to structure programs to be supportive of broader communities. And so as you think about building out programs to engage your students around diversity and equity and inclusion, I mean, your interns, it's really important for you to start probably with a really important question, which is, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion really mean for your organization? Having clarity around that is really important. And I know that seems like a really simple example, but when I just say those terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, just on this call, we all probably have a very different perspective on what that means to us personally and how that shows up in our organizations. You might also be thinking about justice or belonging or access. All of those are terms that we are using and engaging right now in the space, and having clarity for ourselves internally is really important and the most important first step. And with that, I think as you start to engage your interns, you want to make sure that they have some exposure to that as well. Ensure that as a part of their onboarding and their initial engagement, you're talking about the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion for your organization. But I wouldn't encourage you to isolate their experience from the broader experience of your organization. Integrate them in what you're doing and think about it in terms of coming to them with the transparency and honesty of what it really looks like for your organization, warts and all. If you are still stumbling through it, stumble through it with them. If you have a lot of efforts that are really engaging different parts of your community, allow them to be engaged in all of those things in a very authentic way. They want to see what it really looks like and feels like to be integrated into your organizations. And if you do that, the likelihood and the chances that there'll be better retention on the back end when they have opportunities to be thoughtful about who else they're going to engage with, who they're going to have an internship with next summer, who they'd like to start their careers with, having a realistic expectation of what the community is like and what your efforts are like, I think will be really important to helping them make those decisions. So my first advice to you would be, understand what it means to you as an organization, and then include your interns very authentically in the experiences that you have for the broader community. I think of the things that we do we call them team member resource groups at the Red Cross, because we have both volunteers and paid employees. Most organizations have employee resource groups or affinity groups, but if your organization has those structures and they are holding events, invite your interns to get engaged and to be actively involved. I always joke with people in our organization, I'm like, the team member resource groups really are like clubs and organizations from your college experience, right? They're very similar. And so interns will fall right in line. That will feel like a very familiar structure to them. And it will probably help them start thinking about what community feels like in your organizations pretty quickly. The second thing that I would offer to you about your experience with your interns is to give them an opportunity to engage with your leadership. And I would say that really intentionally. So while before it was discouraging you from really thinking about creating unique experiences for your interns around DE&I and really encouraging you to include them into all that's happening in the organization, on this point, I might get you to kind of deviate from that a little bit and create unique experiences for your interns to have dialogue and conversation with your senior leaders. Particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's important for two reasons. One, it's going to give your interns an opportunity to really understand the organization's commitment around these efforts and these experiences and around your culture, right? The commitment your organization has around this really is an opportunity to build culture. But the second reason I say that may be a little helpful for you and the organization as well. It's because interns will ask questions and provide feedback that might be a real opportunity and learning experience for your senior leaders as well. And I had an experience like that recently in an organization that will remain unnamed, where one of our interns had, in a conversation with our CEO, was having a conversation about the summer and really talking about all of the good experiences that she had. And then our CEO asked, if extended an offer, would she take it? And she told our CEO, no, she would not take the offer if it was given to her. The CEO asked why, and she said, well, when I look at your senior executive team, I don't see people who look like me. And so I don't see the path to leadership in the organization. And because of that, I'd rather go to an organization where I see myself represented and I know that there's going to be an opportunity for me to grow and excel. Of course, the CEO was completely disturbed by that answer and wanted to make sure that we could share with the intern that there really were paths and opportunities for her, and to make sure that we were exposing her to all of the things that we were doing to make sure that that would be something that she would be able to visibly see in the future if she decided to remain with the organization. But what that said to me, what that did for us was two things. One, it reminded us that we should be having conversations about all of the things that are happening in the organization in the same way we would with our workforce. Making sure that our interns are exposed really helps them understand who we are as organizations and what our true commitments are. And it starts to help them see themselves in the environment as well. The second thing that did was it really educated my senior leader, right? It painted a story and told a story to my senior leader in a way that we've been talking about, but it just created an indelible impression upon her because it was a real live example from someone who's experiencing that within the community. And so I encourage you to include your interns in intimate conversations with your leadership. Hopefully that is manageable, right? Depending on the size of your internship program and access to senior leaders, you may have to think of more creative ways like lunch and learns or coffee chats that create maybe a smaller or more intimate environment. But if you have the opportunity to enlist your executive team into having one-on-one conversations, I think they are absolutely beneficial. And I'll just offer, our CEO she was like, I'm going to do 5-minute conversations with everyone. They were really, really quick, but they meant the world both to the intern, and it was absolutely important to her learning and awareness as well. And then the last thing that I want to leave you with is just this notion about what could be the benefits if you do this, right? What might happen both for your interns and for your organization if you thoughtfully lean into integrating them into the work that you're already doing around diversity and inclusion. I've already mentioned that it's going to give them a lot of information to make decisions. What I will also offer you is what I've seen is that retention has been higher for the interns with whom an authentic integration into the organization happened. They felt like they really had a sense of what it would be like to engage in that organization. They really felt like they had an opportunity to have a voice and to see how that voice would be heard in the organization. And it felt like it was aligned to things that were happening that they would expect to happen, even if as they continue to join the organization in the future. So I've seen retention go up when integration happens. Also seen, had a real great opportunity, as I mentioned before, our interns are vocal, like they're having these experiences and they're challenging us in so many ways, to hear from their feedback, right? As we are thinking about how we advance our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want to make sure that it aligns with community. If everyone doesn't feel like they have a voice, if everyone doesn't understand their individual responsibility, our efforts will not advance. And our interns' voices are equally important in that. They asked questions and posed challenges in ways that made us think a little differently about the work. And it absolutely helped us evaluate what we were doing and enhance and enrich our programs as well. So that youth voice around DE&I is as important as every other voice. And so we've benefited from having an opportunity to hear from our interns. And then the last thing that I would offer to you is that there are lots of ways to think about how you might engage with your students over the summer. There are lots of ways to think about what experiences you want to offer them. If you have diversity, equity, and inclusion embedded into all that you are doing, they will see that. They'll start to pick up on it and understand the culture, and they'll be able to lean forward in a way that enriches the experience that they have throughout the summer and hopefully brings them back fully into your organizations. I've seen it happen so wonderfully and so beautifully, and I hope that you have the opportunity to experience that with your interns over the summer as well. So I'm going to pause there because I could go on for hours because I love this stuff. And just see if there are questions. I thought I saw a few things pop up and I tried to pull up the chat. So it looks like I do see a question that looks like it might have been a direct message to me that says, will there be a recording of this? If that was the first part of the question. And Elena's shaking her head. Yes.
Yes, we are recording. Yes, and we'll share it. Mm-hmm.
And then the other was, could you share any good resources off the top of your mind on what I am discussing, and provided an email address. So I'm going to copy down that email address and offer feedback. But what I'll also share is a lot of what we, again, because we decided to take the approach of aligning it with our overall DE&I initiatives to make sure that it felt authentic to interns and students. What I would be sharing really is akin to what we are looking at more broadly as an organization. And so we are having very deep conversations around what we are seeing as a continuum from lack of awareness all the way to active advocacy and allyship in communities. So we're looking at a continuum of that and having some dialogues around that work. We're also going to be doing some conversations on unconscious bias and anti-racism. But we are also really just looking at what it means to be inclusive in terms of leadership and the skill sets and the competencies that allow all of the work to happen in teams, whether that's innate curiosity, psychological safety, the ability to have critical and crucial conversations. So I just offer that. Those are some of the things that we are working on in dialogue in our organization, and we'll gladly share some of those resources so that you have an opportunity to benefit from them as well.
Awesome. Any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, because we do have several folks, you can do that as well. This is an awesome opportunity to just get some additional insight into ways you're thinking about your interns this summer or other broader DEI initiatives that your organization may be thinking about. I do have some questions that I can pose if folks don't have any. I'll give it another minute.
I also just want to clarify, Adrian's only with us for another, what, like 5 to 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so your questions would be around her expertise, and then we can always go into like operational and logistical questions later. But this is specifically for Adrian, since she came to give us this keynote. So if you have any questions on diversity as a whole, or how you can do better with your interns, she's the person to ask.
Great. I'll go ahead and pose a question, Adrienne, while we wait for others who may be thinking of their questions. Can you talk a little bit about so one thing that we are experiencing is that students, especially around this diversity initiative, they've had to almost build trust in terms of us and the organizations around, you are vulnerable a little bit in sharing aspects of your identity in terms of, thinking about that as a forefront of these initiatives. On the flip side of that, though, there is an opportunity that could happen, unfortunately, where there may be a negative experience if they, I know sometimes the recruitment life cycle and responding to applicants and things like that can fall by the wayside. And so, the importance of closing that loop and helping students to know about why they haven't been chosen or whatever. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of that and what that does and for diversity initiatives overall and the brand of the organization?
Absolutely. So first, let me say, we are always trying to understand the demographies of our organizations and of the individuals within them. And organizations work very hard to help create an environment where people feel safe being willing to disclose both more about themselves and hopefully being open and authentic with those experiences, because it's what helps us all grow. But we do have to honor that. And what I've seen from the recruitment cycle, and they may feel disconnected, but what I would offer is for the person experiencing it, it may not. We get busy. Lots of people, apply. We go through tons of interviews and then follow-up interviews and engage, and we are moving through the process and we keep going. We reach out to individuals with whom we want to bring on board to the organization, and we keep moving down the track. And we may not inform individuals who have applied that they are no longer being considered. We may not follow up with individuals with whom we've interviewed to let them know that they aren't moving further along in the process. And what I've seen, particularly around individuals with less experience in this, individuals who haven't applied a lot or are early in their career around this, that the attribution often turns internally. What is it that I did that maybe didn't help me move further along in this experience? And if they took the opportunity to self-disclose, they may assume that that could have been a part of the issue. It was because I disclosed that I am of a certain race or ethnicity, that I have a certain disability status, that I am a member of a certain community, I never want people to make those associations, but I've had those conversations with students that if I choose not to disclose, right? In the same way that if I think to change my name, right? I've had the conversation with students about, I want to choose what I believe to be a more traditional American sounding name. I would venture to say that all names are that, but the context was if it sounded a little more mainstream, that they might move further along in a process. We never want to leave that to be the impression of students. So I would always encourage us, that follow-up absolutely helps individuals understand that their engagement was important to us, and that even though they may not be moving forward, that they may not be moving forward is not an association with who they are, but maybe some decisions we're making about the skills we need in the organization. So I would actively encourage us to follow up. If we can create systems that help automate that for volumes of individuals who may apply but not be moving forward. But I always recommend, and have always shared in my teams, it's a personal touch to anybody we've spoken to. If you've had an interview and a conversation, it is just honorable to have the conversation to say that you're not moving forward, so that individuals understand that they were valued. And what I offer to your brand is students talk. Students will absolutely tell the story. And so if they don't have a positive engagement, they may share that about you as well. And campuses are small. And so if it's important to your relationship with that institution, I would offer you it is very important for your relationship with that student. And I would actively encourage you to follow up if you can.
Thank you. That's a great metric. If you've had a conversation, then it offers, then it lends itself to a conversation, or at least some sort of communication. That's a good point. A question that came into the chat. So our organization is still working mostly virtually and likely will be through the summer. In addition to virtual coffee chats and virtual lunches, how do you recommend we best integrate interns so they don't feel isolated during internships? Authentic integration in the virtual world is tougher than usual, so any advice is helpful.
I do, and then I saw another question that popped up that looked like it may be directly to me, and so I'll offer that one next. But so
Great.
What I've seen, virtual was a challenge and interesting for all of us, and we intentionally did some things that allowed interns, again, to align with structures we had for engaging the broader workforce. So we really actively got our team member resource groups involved in doing some things that were akin to what you might have seen socially, whether it was like a pseudo, we don't like to call them happy hours because we're inviting our interns, but a pseudo social hour after 5, where people were really just talking about things that they were interested in. We did virtual DJ sessions, right? So we definitely took a cue out of, of course, he's, now that I need his name, he's completely escaping me. If I just turn on Instagram, he would show right up.
DJ D-Nice.
D-Nice, thank you. Thank you. We took a cue out of D-Nice's book, and we got some DJs to help. One was an internal employee who wanted to do it, and then we hired somebody to do it and did like a game night and a DJ session. But again, something that we were also offering for our broader community to participate in a trivia night. We were just trying to find ways to keep the community connected and having an opportunity to engage our interns, and that was important. The other note that I will add might be around buddyship and or mentorship. I believe as a part of your program, you've already committed to making sure that there is a mentor for each of the interns. I would add to that that you may also want to have like a buddy. So what we saw was having a connection and an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who felt closer in experience to the intern was really helpful. And so we tapped into our early career team member resource group to get them to be buddies with the interns so that they could ask the questions that they don't always want to ask somebody who they feel is more senior, and they could get what they felt was an authentic sense of what the culture might be. And culture is really what we're talking about in a way that I think is really important for interns to experience. So those are just a couple of ideas of things that we did to try to engage them that they would have seen replicated if they joined us full time, that we were still trying to have those types of engaging experiences for our workforce as a whole. But like the trivia nights, game nights, DJ sessions were a huge hit, in addition to the coffee chats and things that you might be thinking about. So Elena, let me offer this question. It was interesting, and I think one that's beneficial for the group. If your organization has lots of warts, I said warts and all earlier, if your organization has lots of warts, how do we expose them to interns without alienating them? Want to be honest about DE&I challenges, but also want to give them a great experience. I think that is an amazing question. And so here's what I would offer. Elena's gonna be like, I'm never inviting her back again. Lord have mercy. But I tend to be a tell it like it is kind of person. And so what I want to offer you is if you have warts, they're going to find out. And so hiding it will simply show you are trying to hide the truth. If your DE&I efforts are stumbling, or you're still trying to figure it out, or you're not sure everybody in the organization is aligned and on board, they will feel it because they're going to talk to other individuals and they're going to try to understand the culture, and it will be evident. What I would offer you is if you are honest about that, they will have an opportunity to make an honest decision. Now, I'm not telling you throw them into the middle of a very tough conversation with senior leaders, or if you think there's something that's going to be really contentious, to put them in the midst of that. But I would offer that honesty is likely going to win you more points to say, we are working on this, but we don't have it all figured out yet. And I would venture to say none of us do. We're working on it. We don't have it all figured out yet. There are some areas where we have strengths and areas where we have a lot of opportunity, but we still want you to have an authentic experience with us. And we welcome if you've got thoughts or feedback or concerns that you share that, and we can work through that together. So that would be my guidance is they're going to find out about the warts if you don't tell them. And if you're upfront about the experience, they're likely to at least have enough respect to know that you're being honest. And interns want to be a part of the solution. They want to be a part of the effort. You might be surprised how they respond and want to get on board with helping to make change in the organization.
Thank you. If you have time, Danielle did drop one last question in the chat. I'm reading it, but related to your previous comment about valuing people's time in their application, are you familiar with the models of compensation for applicants who make it to a certain stage in the interview process? Secondly, do you have any resources on combating imposter syndrome, particularly for interns and employees of color?
Interesting. Oh, I love both of those. Okay, so the first piece of that question, I think, was around different models of compensation for interns who make it to a certain point in the application process. So not knowing exactly what you're talking about, I'm thinking of things like signing bonuses if you get to a certain point, or exploding offers if we want you to make a decision at a certain point, or there may be a different level of compensation if we have an opportunity to retain you summer after summer. So those are just a few of the things that I've seen in my experience about differential ways of compensating individuals as they move through the process, typically around interns and or students that we're trying to hire full time. If those are aligned with what you're thinking about, I definitely understand those and would offer that the work I have done and would do in organizations would be to make sure that those are equitable, to make sure that if those things are happening, that they are equitable, and to be thoughtful. One of the things that I often do to challenge is I often think of my students, particularly students who are from lower socioeconomic statuses and or first generation. The notion of pressure around making a decision early in the process may not give full weight to the experience that they need to have to make a good decision about their summer. And it may not be because they're shopping around. It may be because they are including other individuals in the conversation. That also might be true based on the cultural heritage or background of a student, that the decision isn't theirs alone. The decision is a family decision in many cases. And so those graduated competency models and or models that are around pressure around decision may not give full weight to students of diverse backgrounds. And I often encourage organizations to be really thoughtful about that and make sure that what they are doing is equitable, not just equal when it comes to those. And then there was a second part of that question, Elena, that I have already forgotten.
About the imposter syndrome, resources for combating imposter syndrome for interns and employees of color.
So yes, interesting. The work that we've seen most and that we've engaged around most has really been interesting, that it pulls in both this notion of race and authenticity and being able to show up authentically as who you are, but also in relation to imposter syndrome around women, right? So gender. And so we've looked at those in both ways. And funny, one of the recent articles, which I will share, really challenged organizations around this notion of this notion of pointing out imposter syndrome in particular communities, because those are also often the attributes that we value in those communities and or have socialized that are important. And so is it imposter syndrome, or is it people showing up the way we've socialized individuals to show up? So there are interesting ways to look at that. What I would offer, and so happy to share that. So Elena, I'll follow up with you to share these resources back so they can be shared with the broader group. So would offer you to share that. But what I would also maybe mention, just as a quick opportunity in the summer, is that would be a really great conversation and dialogue for interns. And I don't mean just underrepresented interns. I mean interns as a whole, to have this conversation about imposter syndrome. There are some unique ways that it shows up for underrepresented communities, LGBTQIA+ communities, our individuals with disability communities. It shows up in those places. But I would also venture to say that it shows up for interns in relation to their integration and interaction with organizations, where they're going to be engaged with everyone around them who's got more experience than they do. And it could show up there. I would say that's a very powerful conversation to have and to host. And again, we'll gladly share that article back with the group for their review.
Awesome.
Was there one last one? I thought I might have seen another one, but I know for sake of time on your agenda.
Yeah, no, I know you've got to definitely. So thank you so much for your awesome insights. I told everyone you're in for a treat. You made an honest woman out of me, so I appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and thanks again. And you would certainly be invited back anytime. There's nothing you said that I didn't love. So
all right.
Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Awesome. You too. So for those who are continuing on with us, I'm going to turn it over to Aaliyah, who's going to actually share some statistics and some results that we have so far from this initiative. So I will turn it over.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm so happy to see all of you here. So I just wanted to share some of the stats that we've been collecting so far. They are by no means comprehensive. They are not final. But as you are kind of our first partners in this ever initiative, I really think of you all as kind of helping us work together towards this common goal. And so I wanted to be really transparent about the numbers we're seeing and how things have been going so far. And we will be releasing a kind of final outcomes report in the summertime where we can show everything that's happened. And I'm going to go over some of the initial stats. If you have stats that you really want to see, please DM them to me in this chat or send me an email at aaliyah@jhu.edu, and we will do our best to pull that data for you and put that in the report. I know that for you, this is as much of kind of an experiment as it was for us, and we're really excited to share. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump in and share my screen. I want to be honest that some of our results are exciting, but some of them are also maybe a little disappointing. So we're going to continue to iterate and get as good as we can in making sure that we're promoting kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion in these internships. But let's start with kind of the first major overview. So we had 48 companies end up interviewing. So if you're here, you know, that was one of you. Can everyone see my screen? Can I just get a thumbs up? I want to make sure. Okay. We had 102 internship listings, about 469 students apply, and ultimately we found that we were able to get 101 internship offers extended so far. We still have data coming in, so that number will likely increase. The first stat that I noticed is that only 5% of the offers that were made to non-US citizens, which I thought was something to note because 26% of the roles were open to non-US citizens. So that's definitely, I think, an area for improvement. In terms of job offers by ethnicity, you can look here. I'm not going to read the numbers one by one, but you can see kind of what that breakdown looked like with our biggest population of offers going to Asian American students. And then 20% was just undisclosed. So we don't know because the student didn't identify or report. But this is what that breakdown looks like. In terms of degree, 28% of our students that received offers were master's students. About 72% of our students who received offers, internship offers, were undergrad. That doesn't surprise me because the majority of students who applied to these opportunities were indeed undergrad students. And I think this is probably the most important graph so far in terms of diversity designation. So 36% of the students who got offers were classified as URM, underrepresented minority students. And then 30% of the students who received offers were classified as first generation or limited income students. And then we have a whopping 34% that we don't know in which category they fall into. So the 34%, that could be students with disabilities, which we have the data, but we can't access it by student because of the sensitivity of it. We're trying to see how we can potentially get our student disability services to look at the list and tell us, well, X percentage of the students that got offers have a disability. And then we also have LGBTQIA+ students who also could be in this group, but haven't necessarily identified themselves in our database. So that's the data that we have so far. If you, again, would like to see something, please DM me, and I'd be happy to include that in the report when it comes out in the summer. Thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you. And so just before we move into our next component of our agenda today, where we'll be doing some breakout rooms and you'll have an opportunity to just connect with each other a bit more about really how to make the best experience for your interns this summer. do want to just remind you of some of the things that you have agreed to provide for your interns for the summer, as well as some of the things that we want to make sure that we do to make this the best program possible. So many of you already have shared the outcomes in terms of who received offers, who accepted offers, all of that. If you haven't shared that information yet, though, please definitely do that with Aaliyah. That will be really helpful for us. Also reaching out to those students, as Adrian mentioned earlier, reaching out to those students who maybe didn't get selected, but you did have in the interview process, certainly reaching out to them and letting them know that they, did not get an offer would be helpful and would allow us to continue to build that trust with our students as we move forward with other programs like this. Also, making sure to offer at least one networking opportunity for your intern this summer. Obviously, you can do more than those, but as Adrian mentioned, there are certainly ways that you can do that even in a virtual space, whether it's connecting the students with other interns that are there for the summer, or through ERG groups or whatever other resources that you find appropriate for the students and the interns to connect with. Additionally, as part of their onboarding, making sure to introduce them and connect them with a casual mentor, someone who can be a point of contact for them throughout their time this summer. This person can be helpful in helping them just to ask some of those questions that they may have, understand more about the company culture, to get advice, maybe to connect them with other folks, or just, be a good, easy point of contact outside of their direct manager or supervisor who they're reporting to. And then lastly, making sure that they are getting, ideally throughout, but at minimum at the end, some really good performance-focused feedback on their experience as an intern. This is a great way for them to just really understand what the developmental areas are, where they can continue working, and also just give you an opportunity to really have those helpful conversations as a way to potentially, see about moving this person forward into obviously the transition that we all hope to have, which is for full-time employment, because you've made such an investment in the interns to come this summer. So those are just a few of the things that, again, we want to make sure that you complete as part of this program and this process, and we certainly thank you for all of your work in those areas. For next, I will be transitioning over to Dr. Carlos Medina, who is going to lead you on a bit of discussion around 3 key areas and how to support your intern this summer. So I will turn it over to Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Clifton, for sharing the slides. And although she's not here with us, thank you, Adrian, for just an amazing conversation. And so I'm not going to run through this again, because Elena just did so well. But what Clifton, Mike, and I are going to do now is kind of lead an interactive conversation using breakout rooms as workshops to really work with you on how you can implement these best practices within this summer experience for your DEI Collective interns and also your other interns that you might have this summer. And really the overall goal is to promote equitable access to all of the aspects of these internship experiences. And so if we can go to the next slide. Before we get started with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mike, who's going to talk about what we mean when we say things like diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thanks, Carlos. I'm going to actually have Ritu Basin talk about difference, diversity, inclusion, and equity, and how difference could give us an opportunity to reimagine how DE and I can be practiced within our own organizations. Can you hit play, please?
Diversity. Diversity, I define as 1Q, the quantitative representation of difference. It's about counting how many women, people of color, people from indigenous communities we have, how many people we have from the LGBTQ communities. and more. When we are in the land of diversity, we put resources towards building a more inclusive environment. So we'll have a committee, we'll have policies, we'll do training, we'll have a few other bells and whistles. But the problem is that when we are stuck in the land of diversity, which every single Canadian organization that I have worked with is, so let's start with that, we say we value differences, but the actual lived experience in the trenches is one of sameness. It's the, oh, we love differences, be different, please everyone, one, come all, come join us, different people. And then it's like the voices of differences show up at our doorsteps and we're like, oh, did we say you could be different? Just kidding. Leave your differences at the door, minimize your differences in favor of sameness. It's a message of behavioral sameness or a message of conformity. And because of that, because we're counting and focusing on numbers and we're pushing behavioral conformity, it feels a lot like tokenism. People feel like tokens and not a lot of shifting. And so it feels like all this work you're doing is all about tokenism and ticking a box. I don't feel really valued. By the way, in the land of diversity, that's where equality, the concept of treat everyone the same, lives. For the lawyers in the room, you'll remember this from law school as well. Equality is about, in order to yield fairness, we treat everyone the same. It's an entrenchment of sameness. And we know from the law, treating everyone the same has an adverse impact on people who come from marginalized communities because not everyone starts in the same place. So diversity is important because we need numbers. If you don't have anyone from the Indigenous communities in your pipelines or in your entry-level ranks, you're not going to be inclusive. So diversity does matter, but the problem is being entrenched in diversity means being entrenched in sameness, and that doesn't work. When we're in inclusion, we have two cues. We have the quantitative representation of difference, like you can count people, but they are represented across the organization, across the leadership ranks. And we have what's called the qualitative experience of difference, the second cue. And when I say the qualitative experience of difference, what I'm talking about here is when you ask people who come from communities that have been historically marginalized and have current experiences with marginalization, how do you feel when you come into work? They'll say to you, I can bring my whole, true, authentic cultural self to work. I can do me, speak the way I want to speak, dress the way I want to dress, emote the way I want to emote, talk about what I want to talk about as it relates to my personal life, with good judgment. And I feel like it's so interesting because I just think that I don't need to add that in, but then many times in my sessions, a leader will put up their hand, usually a he will put up his hand and go, surely you mean not everything. And I'm like, surely I don't mean everything. No. So yes, with judgment, the point is you can be who you are and still have not only equal access to opportunities, but because you're thriving, you have more opportunities. That's what inclusion looks like. The qualitative experience is there. Equity is about recognizing historical legacies and current or present realities of discrimination and oppression that marginalized people experience.
Great, thank you, Carlos. So Ritu Basin is a South Asian Canadian thought leader and life coach who, as mentioned here, celebrates difference and how organizations and companies can incorporate difference within their DE&I initiatives. So what we're going to do in our breakout rooms is unpack this further and see this as an opportunity to also see this as a learning moment for all of you and for the students that are participating in the DEI Collective. So these are the 3 points that we're going to cover in our breakout rooms, and we're going to provide a sort of taste of what we'll be sharing in these sessions.
All right, so in the first breakout room, we're really going to focus on creating inclusive spaces and building community. And often in DEI, we focus on the people. But one thing we're going to touch on in my breakout room will be the environment, as the environment itself also provides a number of signals that can be perceived as welcoming or exclusionary to individuals before they even meet the people that inhabit those spaces. And so ambient belonging is this concept of a feeling of fit in the environment and similarity to the people imagined to occupy it. So this means even if you remove the people in this image, the glass walls, the Post-it notes, the table setup, etc., they all signal the type of person that one imagines would fit within this place, and that it causes new people arriving in this space to evaluate whether or not they might fit. And so this has changed drastically as a result of virtual Zoom. So in our breakout room, we're going to really talk about how to create these inclusive spaces in a virtual setting as well. Next slide. And then also what we'll touch on are inclusive spaces, including the people, of course, and building that community within your program and within your office. And so along with the spaces we create, the people that we bring into there and the intentional connections we make between each other.
And in my session, I'm going to focus on shifting away from thinking about feedback as emphasized by the person itself toward thinking about feedback as a learning opportunity where it's focused on action. And we're going to look at a couple techniques and then explore how we can actually incorporate feedback over the course of the internship experience in these very meaningful and impactful ways.
Hey folks, Clifton here. And so in the third group, we're going to be focused on fostering inclusive professional education. And so we're going to think about this concept where it's focused on intra-community, inter-community, and community advancement. And so as we relate this to the DEI Collective, we want to take that from a perspective of if we're thinking about race as identity someone holds, right? And so how are they engaging in their own racial experience in their community? And then how are they connecting with others around different racial communities? And then overall, the entire community, how are they engaging in this type of conversation to really think about that work? And so we're going to focus on individually how we're thinking about this for ourselves as humans. How do we do this work with others in our organization? And then overall, what is the organization looking at? And how do we create community for folks to even think about breaking the cycle of socialization, of which we all have engaged in some capacity, or continue the status quo, because sometimes that might be okay as well. And so with that, with all three of these focus areas, we want to also think about, how do you apply this throughout the entire internship experience? And so we're thinking this is a example. You don't have to do this. Elena mentioned the idea that you can, the feedback experience, right? So that can happen throughout, but it also can happen at the end. Definitely, we really want that to happen. So this is why it's a outline of an example. And so if you could screenshot this or take a picture of it as an example of how you all can then, reiterate for you all how you think it might be best for you. So I'm not going to go through it. I think it would be great if you all take a screenshot so you have access to it, and we can talk about this in the groups. And yes, we will share the slides later.
Great.